Thank you so much, Tania, for joining us on Internash YouTube channel. We are really excited to have you and know everything about Canadian PR and how international students can get a permanent residency in Canada and then compare it with Australia. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Devarshi. And yes, I am excited to know about the Australian PR system. And first, let me start with explaining and giving you basic details of how the Canadian PR system works like. So it's basically a point-based system, and you need to have certain number of points depending on a draw. So the draw comes out each 2 to 3 weeks, and depending on the points that come out in the draw, you need to get points above that. And if you have that, then you get your invitation for PR. So it is a pretty straightforward process, and I think Canada PR would be the easiest one compared to the other international countries.
Yeah.
So yes, it is pretty straightforward and easy. And um, if you have education back in India, if you have Canadian education, if you have Canadian experience, and if you have a good IELTS score, then you're pretty much going to get a PR. But if for some reason you don't meet those criterias and you don't reach that desired point, then there is also another option where you can move to one of the less populated regions, and you can apply for a PNP. So PNP stands for the Provisional Nominee Program, and this is basically Canada wants more people to go into their less populated regions. So basically you wouldn't be in Ontario, you would be in places like Newfoundland or something like that where there is less population, and you get extra points for that, and that would make you definitely get a PR.
Let's talk about your friend's journey. So you started studying in Canada and you got 1 year course, right?
Right.
So based on that 1 year, how many years can you work full time?
So this is how it works. If you study for 1 year, you get a 1 year work permit. And if you study for 2 years, then you get a 3 years work permit.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Because in Australia, if you want a work permit, you have to study for 2 years. So the duration has to be 2 years. So like bachelor's or master's, usually they are 2 years. And based on that, if you're in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, you get 2 years of post-study work visa, which is like what we are talking about after study, full-time working rights. But if you're in regional areas, you get 3 years or 4 years, depending on where you are. Very similar logic. Australian government also wants people to like move to less populated regions. And that is the time to work in your field or sort out if you want permanent residency. So in the 2 years, for example, that a student gets a post-study work visa in Canada, what do they have to do ideally?
So first thing is get a job. And because getting a Canadian experience is one of the most important parts of getting a PR. So one of the easiest way to get PR is through the Canadian experience class, which is one pathway to PR. And for that, you need a minimum of 1 year work experience in Canada. And once you have that, you give your English exam, and you have your college education. So you're pretty much likely to get a PR just on those bases. And if you have experience from back in India, then you put that into, and that's it.
And you get points for each of the things that you're putting in, and based on that you get a final score of your points, and then you can apply in the draw.
Yes.
Okay, exactly. So for example, I have everything. I've studied in Canada, I worked for 1 year, and I apply for that draw or for my permanent residency. How long does it usually take for me, for example, to get a Canadian permanent residency if I've studied in Canada?
So to get your invitation for permanent residency could be within a few days. So if the draw, so if you apply, say today, and you have a draw coming out tomorrow, then maybe in just a few days you would get your invitation. But invitation doesn't mean you have your PR. This means that you are eligible, and they're going to now assess your documents and see if everything. And once that is done, then you get your PR. So wait time can vary depending on the situation. Like because of COVID, the situation, with the COVID situation, the wait time has increased more. So I've seen people even having to wait 6 months just to get their PR.
Okay.
So
Right.
it varies depending on the
Yeah.
situation. Yeah.
Like just to give you a brief about how Australian permanent residency system work. Australia is a point-based system, so you get points for your age, you get points for your English, you get points for studying if you have bachelor's in your country, so you get points for that. If you have studied here for 2 years, you get 5 points for that. If you have work experience in Australia, you get points for that, and then you accumulate all of these things. And if you're in regional area and applying in regional area, then state gives you certain points. So what happened was that I studied in Melbourne because I wanted to, like it's a big city. I'm going to live in big city. But then I realized that if I want to keep my option of permanent residency open, that's why I have to move to Adelaide. And I think like as of now, again, with COVID and everything, people are most likely to get their permanent residency if they're living in regional area. And that is just because like Melbourne and Sydney has population of about 5 million people. So it's just number of people applying for permanent residency is a lot higher from those cities. And that's why the competition is higher. And that's why the points are higher. So yeah, that's the crash course for Australian permanent residency.
So one question, if you apply from a regional province, if you apply from there, then do you have to stay there after you get your permanent residency?
That's a really good question. So there are two types of visas. So one is, let's say 491 and other is 190. Like no need to like remember the numbers, but just like I'll explain what it is. So like it's a full permanent residency. So that's 190 and other is 491, which is like 5-year visa. But in that 3 years, you have to stay and work in a regional area. And after that 3 years, you can apply for the full permanent residency. So it's like provisional permanent residence. Yeah, but it's a really good question. 491 and 190, because state are sponsoring, they want you to stay in a regional area and grow that state. But apart from that, 189 is the easiest, not the easiest, actually the hardest, but most simplest, because it's like, here are my points, give me the permanent residency. If those occupation are on the list. And as long as your occupation is on the list, you can apply for that visa. But primary thing in Australia is the occupation. Like state needs, for example, people like us who are like into marketing, advertising and stuff, then Melbourne did not have a marketing specialist on their occupation.
Okay.
That's why I moved to Adelaide, because South Australia as a state has marketing specialists on their occupation.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so that you also have to check the occupation.
Yeah, it's the same in Canada. You need to have an occupation, but I think the list is much broader than what you have probably over there.
Yeah.
And it's not really province to province. So it's like the whole of Canada, there's one list, and if you fall under that, then your experience would be counted. So something like a cashier or maybe someone working at a restaurant, even if you work full time, your experience wouldn't be counted eligible for permanent residency. It has to be a field job and it has to fall under those categories.
Right. Now, I think that is quite similar. And the last question. So what would be your suggestion for people who are in their country? Should they come directly after getting permanent residency, or should they come as an international student first and then get their permanent residency?
I would suggest come as an international student first, because when you come in with a permanent residency, you're starting off new and you don't know what's going on. How do you even make contacts? Because everything depends on networking here. So how do you make those contacts if you don't know anyone? When you come here as an international student, then you start in college, you meet new people, you meet professors, and it's a much more smoother journey because you get a part-time job, you're studying, you make friends, and then eventually you apply for a permanent residency, you go for a full-time job. So it's just easier that way.
Yeah,
but
if you
really have if you have a lot of experience, you don't want to study, then you can definitely go for the express entry from your own country.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for this amazing information. For all the viewers out there, I'm linking Tanya's YouTube channel and her social media handles in the description below so that you can directly go and know everything about how life of an international student is or life in Canada is like. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Okay, cool.